she was his hidden affair until she stood at his altar. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the heart-wrenching story of a woman who thought she had it all until everything changed in the most unexpected way. You see, for Lily, love had always been a complicated game, especially when it involved someone like Julian North. Julian, a successful tech entrepreneur, seemed to have everything: money, power, influence. He was the type of man who could make your heart race in a second, yet leave you wondering where you stood just moments later. It was a secret, this affair between them. He kept her hidden, his other woman, tucked away from his perfect public image. She thought she was his everything, until the moment he asked her to play the part of his fiancée for a family gathering. She agreed, thinking it was just one of those strange requests from a man who lived a life of half-truths. But that was the day everything started to unravel. Julian had promised her that everything would be fine, that they would get through this together. But deep down, Lily had always wondered if there was more to the story. And soon, she would find out. What Lily didn't know was that Julian had an agenda of his own, one that would change their lives forever. For the first time, she would be thrust into a world of wealth and glamour she had never imagined. A world where nothing was as it seemed, and the truth was more dangerous than the lies they had built their relationship on. As she stood there, dressed in a gown she could never afford on her own, surrounded by Julian's world of billionaires and CEOs, Lily felt the weight of the moment. She wasn't just pretending anymore. She was the woman he had chosen to present to the world. But there was one thing Julian didn't know: Lily was no longer the woman who would stand in the shadows. No longer. The woman who would quietly accept whatever crumbs he threw her way. She had secrets of her own. And tonight, she would make sure those secrets saw the light of day. As the evening wore on, and the drinks flowed, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The smile Julian flashed her was cold, calculating, and she realized, for the first time, how little she actually meant to him. He had lied to her, not just about their relationship, but about who he really was. And when the moment came for their public reveal at the gala, Lily was ready to face the truth. Julian had no idea what was about to happen. But she did. As the gala continued, Lily found herself standing in the middle of a sea of people, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The whispers of the guests around her seemed to blend into one endless hum, their conversations drowned by the loud music and the clinking of glasses. Julian was by her side, his hand resting lightly on her back, as if everything between them was just another business deal. She tried to focus on the glittering chandeliers above and the elegant gowns around her, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling of being trapped in a world that wasn't hers. She wasn't here as his lover, not really. She was a piece of his public image, a prop to make him look more relatable, more human. For a moment, she wished she could just disappear into the background, where no one could see the lie she had been living. But that wasn't going to happen. Not tonight. Not when everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden was about to come to light. As she looked at the people around her, she noticed how easily they moved through this world of wealth and influence. They spoke with ease, their words flowing like smooth silk. Meanwhile, Lily felt like an imposter, someone who had stumbled into this world by mistake, trying desperately to fit in. Julian, with his perfect smile and confident posture, was the center of attention, as always. He was the man everyone admired, the man who had built an empire from nothing. But tonight, she was starting to see him differently. He wasn't the man she had fallen for. He was a stranger, hiding behind a mask of success and power. And she had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. The truth hit her like a punch to the stomach. All these months, all these stolen moments, had meant nothing to him. He had kept her hidden because he couldn't risk ruining the perfect image he had spent years building. Lily had been just another woman in his life, someone he could enjoy when it was convenient, but never someone worth fighting for. Her chest tightened as she realized how little she had mattered to him. The thought was almost unbearable. But she couldn't let herself crumble now. Not when she was so close to the truth. Not when she had come this far. Just as she was about to turn and confront Julian, the host of the evening, a well-dressed man in a tuxedo, approached them with a glass of champagne in hand. "Mr. North, it's an honor to have you here tonight," he said, extending his hand. Julian smiled, a perfectly practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "The pleasure is mine," he replied, shaking the man's hand. "I must say, the event tonight is quite impressive." Lily stood quietly beside him, feeling like a shadow. The man turned to her then, offering a polite nod. "And you must be the lovely fiancé." His eyes lingered on her, but there was no warmth in his gaze. Lily forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. She hated this. Hated the way they spoke about her as if she was just another accessory to Julian's life. Hated how easily they believed the lie. "Yes, I'm Lily," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded again, clearly satisfied with her answer. He turned back to Julian, and for a brief moment, Lily felt invisible again. The whole room felt like it was spinning around her, and she struggled to keep her composure. Julian had excused himself to speak to a few business partners, leaving Lily standing alone in the center of the grand ballroom. The weight of the evening was starting to sink in. She could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought them back. This was her moment. The moment when everything she had kept inside would finally come to the surface. She didn't know exactly how she was going to do it, but she knew that she couldn't keep pretending anymore. She couldn't keep being the woman who hid in the shadows. Not when the truth was ready to explode. As she looked around the room, she saw the same faces she had seen at all of Julian's events, the same faces that never saw her for who she truly was. They only saw the image Julian had created for her. The perfect fiancée. The woman who had it all. But she wasn't that woman. Not anymore. The realization hit her with a force she hadn't expected. She had spent so long living in the shadow of someone else's life, someone else's expectations. It was time to stop. It was time to step into her own light. The moment was now. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. It was time to take control of her own story. She wasn't going to be Julian's secret anymore. She wasn't going to be anyone's secret. As she made her way toward the grand staircase, she knew that this was the turning point. Everything would change from this moment on. N15, millionaire va ko gari da trang tilde 39 fut da noi. As Lily made her way up the grand staircase, her heart was pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but there was no turning back now. The evening had already shifted in ways she couldn't ignore. Julian had left her in the middle of a sea of people, his attention divided, his focus elsewhere, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. She was done being hidden, done being the person he kept in the shadows. She was done pretending. As she reached the top of the stairs, she paused for a moment, glancing around the grand ballroom below. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the endless flow of champagne, it all felt so distant now. The masks people wore to hide their true intention seemed louder than ever. It was almost as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. She could see Julian across the room, laughing with a group of his business associates, his back to her. He looked the same as always, confident, powerful, untouchable. But Lily knew him better now. She saw through the charade. He wasn't the man she thought he was. And she wasn't the woman he had convinced her to be. She had spent so many months living for him, for his approval, for the validation he promised her, but now, she realized how little of that actually mattered. The only thing that mattered was her own sense of truth. The truth that had been buried deep inside her for far too long. She wasn't going to stand by and watch him continue to live this double life. She wasn't going to let him control her anymore. Her decision had already been made, but there was still one final step. The most important one. As she walked toward him, her steps deliberate, her mind clear. She could feel the eyes of the room on her. The room was filled with the kind of people who didn't know her, who didn't understand her, and it was time to show them who she really was. She was more than just his girlfriend, more than just his hidden affair. She was Lily, and tonight, she was going to make sure everyone knew it. When she reached his side, Julian turned, surprised to see her standing there. His face quickly shifted into the calm, practiced smile that he wore so well, but this time, it didn't fool her. It wasn't enough to mask the guilt she saw flicker behind his eyes. "Lily, I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice smooth and cool, the way he always spoke in public. But she didn't respond the way she usually would. Instead, she stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "I think it's time we talk," she said softly, but her voice was firm. There was no hesitation in her words now. She wasn't the same woman who had entered this room a few hours ago. She wasn't the woman who had hidden behind his lies. She was ready to expose the truth. Julian's smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained his composure. "Now?" In the middle of the event, he asked, his voice dripping with concern, though Lily could tell it was just another act. He was playing the game, pretending to be the concerned fiancé, but Lily wasn't buying it. She stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes, now," she said. "We need to stop pretending. You've lied to me for far too long, Julian. About who you are, about who I am to you, about everything." The words came out more easily than she had expected. It was like she had been holding them back for months, and now that they were out, they felt freeing. For the first time in a long while, she felt powerful. She wasn't just a part of his world anymore. She was taking control of her own. Julian's eyes shifted nervously, his face betraying a hint of panic. "Lily, he started, but she cut him off. "No, don't say anything," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "You don't get to explain yourself anymore. You don't get to lie to me. I know who you are now." There was a moment of silence between them, and then, as if a weight had been lifted, Lily turned and began to walk away. She could hear Julian calling her name, but she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already made her decision. As she walked through the crowd, she realized that this was it. This was the moment when everything would change. She wasn't just walking away from Julian. She was walking away from the life she had built around him. She was walking away from the lies, the games, and the half-truths. And in doing so, she was finally walking toward herself. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As Lily walked through the grand ballroom, the noise and chatter of the crowd seemed to blur around her, her heart pounding with every step. She didn't look back. She could feel Julian's gaze burning into her back, but she refused to let it affect her. Every part of her being screamed to turn around, to go back to him, but she stayed focused on her path. She was done with the lies, done with being someone else's secret. It was time to face the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. She made her way through the sea of well-dressed guests, each one absorbed in their own conversations, oblivious to the internal storm she was weathering. Lily could hardly believe how quickly everything had changed. Just hours ago, she had been standing at Julian's side, playing the part of the perfect fiancée, the woman who had it all. But now, she was walking away from it all, from the gilded cage she had been trapped in, from the man who had promised her love but never showed it. She pushed open the heavy doors of the ballroom and stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air hitting her face like a splash of cold water. She leaned against the railing, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the stillness of the night wash over her. The city lights below twinkled like stars, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the emotions were still raw. Anger. Betrayal. Relief. Fear. She had never been more certain of anything in her life, yet she felt an overwhelming sense of loss. She had given so much of herself to Julian, so much of her heart, and now it felt like she was standing on the edge of an abyss, looking into the unknown. What would happen next? She had no idea. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't go back to the way things were. The sound of footsteps approaching brought her back to the present. She turned, expecting to see Julian, but it wasn't him. Instead, a woman in a sleek black dress stood there, her posture confident, her gaze sharp. Lily didn't recognize her at first, but then she remembered. This was Rebecca, one of Julian's business associates. "Lily," Rebecca said, her voice calm but with a hint of concern. "Are you all right?" Lily stood up straighter, wiping her eyes quickly. She didn't want to show weakness, not here, not now. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady, though the words felt foreign on her tongue. Rebecca didn't seem convinced, her eye scanning Lily's face for any signs of distress. "I know this may be a lot to take in," Rebecca said, stepping closer, "but you don't have to go through this alone." Lily frowned, unsure of what Rebecca meant. "What do you mean?" "Julian," Rebecca began, her voice softening, "he's not the man you think he is. I know you've been with him for a while, but I've seen the way he manipulates people, the way he keeps secrets. You deserve more than that." Lily felt a sharp pang in her chest at Rebecca's words. Part of her wanted to believe her, to let the truth of what she had suspected for so long sink in, but another part of her was still clinging to the hope that there was something good in Julian, something worth fighting for. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. "He loves me." Rebecca shook her head, her expression sad but resolute. "No, Lily. He loves the image of you. He loves what you represent to his public life. But he doesn't love you. Not in the way you deserve." Lily felt her breath catch in her throat, the words hitting her harder than she expected. She wanted to deny it, to tell Rebecca that she was wrong, but deep down, she knew it was true. Julian had never really loved her. Not the way she loved him. Not the way she had hoped for all this time. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse right there. But she didn't. She stood her ground, wiped away the tear that had escaped, and met Rebecca's gaze with a new determination. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me the truth." Rebecca gave her a small smile, her eyes warm with understanding. "You're stronger than you think, Lily. Don't let him tear you down. You have a future waiting for you, one where you get to choose who you are and what you want." As Rebecca walked away, Lily stood there, alone in the silence of the night. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She felt free. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew she would face it on her own terms. The path ahead wasn't clear, but it was hers to choose. And that was enough. The next few days passed in a blur for Lily, each one a mixture of relief, confusion, and something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The moment she had walked away from Julian at the gala had felt like a turning point in her life, but now that the dust had settled, the weight of what had happened felt more complicated than ever. She had left him, yes, but the consequences of that decision weren't as clear-cut as she had hoped. The silence between them had stretched for days. With no word from him, no apology, no attempt to explain himself. She thought about it constantly, replaying the events of that night over and over in her head. Why hadn't he come after her? Why hadn't he tried to fix things? Was he relieved that she had finally walked away? Was he angry? And what did it all mean for her? She couldn't deny that, even though she knew it was the right choice, part of her missed him. The version of him she had believed in, the version of their life that she had wanted to build together. But she couldn't keep living in that fantasy. Julian had proven that much to her. She had to move forward, but the road ahead seemed so uncertain. She spent the next few days focusing on herself, trying to figure out what she wanted from life now that everything had changed. She picked up her paintbrush again, the one thing that had always brought her peace. The strokes of color on the canvas helped quiet her mind, if only for a few hours. But even when she painted, there was a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. The feeling that something still needed to be resolved. She wasn't sure what that something was, but she couldn't ignore it. The quiet hum of the city outside her apartment window one evening broke her thoughts as she sat down to dinner alone. She had grown used to the solitude, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt heavier. The knock on the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and she quickly stood, her heart racing as she made her way to the door. She peeked through the peephole and saw Julian standing outside. Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen him in days, and despite everything that had happened, her heart still skipped a beat at the sight of him. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door, her hand trembling slightly as she grasped the handle. When she saw him, standing there in the doorway, it was as if the entire world around her had stopped moving. His eyes met hers, and for the first time in a long time, she saw something different in them, something raw, something real. It wasn't the cold, calculating gaze of the man she had known for months. This was something else entirely. "Lily," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" His words were simple, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She didn't know what to say. All the anger, all the pain, all the confusion she had felt in the days after the gala rushed to the surface. She had told herself she wouldn't fall back into the trap of hoping for something he couldn't give her. She had promised herself that she wouldn't be the woman who was kept in the shadows anymore. But standing in front of him now, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, it was hard to remember those promises. "I don't know if there's anything left to say, Julian," she finally managed to say, her voice shaky. "You made it clear that I was just a part of your image, someone you could hide away when it was convenient." Julian stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know," he said quietly. "I made mistakes, Lily. I was selfish, and I hurt you. I didn't know how to handle what I was feeling. I didn't know how to be the man you needed me to be." Lily felt her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to be angry with him, to tell him everything he had done wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just stood there, trying to process everything he had said. "But I've had time to think," he continued, his voice steady now, though she could hear the regret in his words. "I don't want to lose you, Lily. I can't keep pretending. I love you. And I know I have a lot to make up for, but I need you to know that I'm ready to try." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had wanted this, had dreamed of hearing these words from him, but now that they were out in the open, it felt different. It didn't feel like the resolution she had been searching for. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something much more complicated. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but could she trust him again? Could she trust herself to make the right choice? The silence between them stretched for a long moment, and finally, Lily spoke. "I don't know, Julian," she said softly. "I need time to figure out what I want. I need time to figure out who I am without you." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can give you time. I'll wait for you, Lily. But please know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the path to something new. Something real. The days following Julian's visit were a whirlwind for Lily, each day felt like an emotional tug-of-war. She had never imagined that she would find herself standing at such a crossroads in her life. The decision to walk away from him had been difficult, but hearing his words again, feeling the weight of his apology, it stirred something deep within her. She knew she couldn't rush into anything, she needed to process everything they had been through, everything he had said. For the first time in a long while, she found herself uncertain about the future, torn between her lingering feelings for Julian and the promise she had made to herself to never let him control her again. She spent her time walking through the city, the cool breeze of early autumn refreshing her as it blew through the streets. She visited the small art galleries she had always loved, finding comfort in the quiet, in the familiar scent of paint and canvas. The world of color and creation had always been her escape, and right now, it was her lifeline. She hadn't been able to paint for weeks, but today, she couldn't ignore the urge any longer. She sat down in front of the blank canvas, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions, but slowly, the brush found its rhythm in her hands. With each stroke, the heaviness in her chest began to ease. The world seemed to shrink down to just her and the art, and for the first time in days, she felt at peace. As the days went on, she began to realize that the only way forward was for her to focus on herself, to rediscover who she was without the weight of Julian's expectations bearing down on her. She realized that she had been losing herself in him, in the life he had created for them, and she needed to find her own path. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness would hit her all at once, when the memories of their time together would rush back and leave her aching for something she wasn't sure she could ever have again. But then she would remind herself of the promise she had made, to be true to herself, to find happiness in her own way, and not in the image of someone else's life. Julian had given her a glimpse of what love could be, but he had also shown her what love wasn't. And it wasn't worth losing herself over. The following week, as she walked through the city on her way to a small cafe she frequented, she couldn't help but notice the subtle change in her demeanor. She had started to walk with a bit more confidence, a little more at ease in her own skin. The small moments, like a smile from a stranger or the feel of the cool air on her skin, began to remind her that life was full of possibilities. She was starting to breathe again, truly breathe, not just survive the days. One afternoon, as she was sipping her coffee and staring out the window of the cafe, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly told herself not to overthink it. He had given her space, but now it was time to face the reality of what they had left behind. She opened the message. "Lily, I know you're still processing everything. I just wanted you to know that I'm here whenever you're ready. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes. But I don't want to rush you. Take your time." She stared at the message for a long moment, the words sinking in slowly. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Julian had finally understood that he couldn't force her to make a decision, that she had to do this on her own. She didn't have to give him an answer now, she didn't have to make any decisions yet. She could take the time she needed. And that's what she would do. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't Julian. It was a reminder from her art school about an upcoming exhibition. She smiled to herself, the excitement for her art bubbling up inside her. She had always dreamed of this moment, the chance to showcase her work, to share her vision with the world. It was a small step, but it was hers. This was her chance to take control of her future, to define herself on her own terms. As she looked at the reminder, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. For the first time in a while, she wasn't thinking about Julian, or their past, or the weight of the decision she had to make. She was thinking about her future. She was thinking about herself. And that was enough. The day of the exhibition finally arrived, and Lily could feel a mix of excitement and nervous energy bubbling inside her. She had spent the last few weeks preparing, focusing solely on her artwork, and now the moment had come to share her work with the world. It was her first big step toward reclaiming her independence, her first real step toward the future she was beginning to envision for herself. The gallery was small, cozy, yet elegant, with white walls that made the colors of her paintings pop. Lily had always found comfort in her art, in the way it allowed her to express everything that words couldn't. As she stood by the entrance, greeting the guests, she felt a sense of pride wash over her. These were her creations, her vision, and she was finally showing them to people who appreciated them. The sound of soft laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, but Lily's attention was fixed on the people walking through the exhibit, stopping to admire the paintings. It was surreal, seeing strangers standing in front of her work, discussing the emotions her pieces evoked. She had always wondered if anyone would ever truly understand what she was trying to say, and tonight, she realized that they did. It was the most validating feeling she had ever experienced. As the evening wore on, she felt herself relaxing, the nervous tension she had felt earlier slowly dissipating. It was as if the world had shifted, and for the first time, Lily felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. But then, just as she was enjoying the moment, she saw him. Julian. He was standing at the far end of the room, his eye scanning the paintings, and for a moment, it felt like the room had gone silent. Lily's heart skipped a beat, and her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected to see him here, not tonight. She hadn't expected to see him at all, not after everything that had happened. But there he was, looking as composed and confident as ever, yet there was something in his posture, something in the way he was looking at her art, that made her pause. He wasn't just here to see the exhibit. He was here for her. Lily's pulse quickened, and for a moment, she couldn't move. Her feet felt frozen to the ground. She had promised herself she wouldn't let him back into her life so easily, that she wouldn't be swayed by his charm or his apologies. But here he was, standing in front of her work, and all she could think about was the way he had left her, the way he had made her feel like she wasn't enough. She had walked away from him, but now, seeing him here, she wasn't sure what to do. Julian finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the room. The instant their gazes locked, the air between them seemed to shift. The crowd around them faded away, and for a moment, it was just the two of them, standing in the quiet of the gallery, separated by distance, but connected by the weight of everything that had passed between them. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching her, and for a moment, Lily wondered if he was waiting for her to say something. She could feel the weight of his presence, but she wasn't sure what he wanted. Was he here to apologize again? Was he here to ask for a second chance? Or was this just another attempt to reassert control over her life? Lily, Julian finally said, his voice softer than she remembered. He stepped toward her, but she didn't move. I didn't expect to see you here, he continued, his eyes searching hers. This is incredible. Your work, it's amazing. His words caught her off guard. She had expected him to be distant, to approach her with some sort of businesslike coldness, but instead, there was genuine admiration in his voice. She had always wondered if he had ever truly seen her, if he had ever cared about her outside of the image he had created for them. And now, standing here in front of her art, it seemed like he had finally seen her for who she really was. But was that enough? Was it enough for her to let him back into her life? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. Thank you, she said, her voice calm, though it was hard to hide the emotion swirling inside her. I've worked hard for this. Julian nodded, his gaze softening. I know you have, he said quietly. There was a pause, and then, as if the tension between them had finally broken, Julian stepped closer. I've made a lot of mistakes, Lily, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I want to try again. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Lily felt her heart race at his words. She had heard this from him before, but this time, it felt different. The sincerity in his eyes, the way he was standing in front of her, vulnerable and raw, it made her question everything she had been holding on to. Was she ready to forgive him? Was she ready to let him back into her life? She didn't know yet, but one thing was clear, this wasn't the same woman who had walked away from him months ago. She had changed. And no matter what happened, she would never lose herself again. For a long moment, Lily stood frozen, her heart pounding as Julian's words hung in the air between them. The soft hum of voices around them faded into the background, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. She had imagined this moment before, the one where he would finally come back to her, say all the right things, and promise to change. But standing here now, face to face with him in the glow of her own success, she realized that something had shifted inside her. She was not the same woman he had once known. She was no longer the hidden affair he kept tucked away behind closed doors. She had grown, she had fought, and she had learned to stand on her own. Julian, she said softly, her voice steady though her chest felt tight. You say you want to make things right, but what does that even mean? You can't just show up and expect things to go back to how they were. Julian's eyes softened as he took another step closer, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. I know, he said. And I don't expect that. I don't want things to go back to how they were. I want something new, something honest. I want to start over, with you, if you'll let me. Lily searched his face, looking for the man she had once loved, the man she had believed in before everything fell apart. And for the first time, she saw him without the walls, without the arrogance that had once defined him. He looked human. vulnerable, real. But the question was, could she trust that? Could she trust him? She took a slow breath, her thoughts swirling. "You hurt me, Julian," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You made me feel like I wasn't enough. You kept me a secret, and that broke something inside me. I can't just forget that." Julian nodded, his expression filled with regret. "I know," he said quietly. "And I hate myself for it. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you away from my world, but all I did was push you further away. I was scared, Lily. Scared of what loving you really meant. Scared of losing control. But when you walked away, I realized I'd already lost everything that mattered." The raw honesty in his words struck something deep in her. For the first time, she felt like he was finally telling the truth, not the kind of truth wrapped in apologies and promises, but the kind that came from pain and understanding. Still, part of her hesitated. Trust was not something that could be rebuilt overnight, and love, no matter how strong, wasn't enough if it wasn't built on honesty. "I don't know if I can do this again," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I don't know if I can open that door just to get hurt again." Julian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He held it out to her, his gaze steady. "I didn't come here just to talk," he said. "I came here because I wanted to show you something." Lily hesitated before taking the envelope from his hand. Inside was an invitation, a formal letter embossed with elegant gold lettering. Her breath caught as she read it. It was an invitation to a charity gala, one she recognized as one of the biggest events in the city's art community. At the bottom, in bold print, was something that made her heart stop. The title read, "The Art of Lily Moore, a Tribute to Strength and Second Chances." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Julian," she said, her voice breaking. "What is this?" He smiled softly. "It's for you," he said simply. "I used the foundation to sponsor your work. I wanted the world to see what I've always seen in you. You said I kept you in the shadows. I'm trying to change that. You deserve to stand in the light, Lily." Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at him. Part of her wanted to be angry, to tell him that he didn't have the right to do this for her, but the other part, the part that still loved him, was overwhelmed by what he had done. For once, it wasn't about him. It wasn't about his image or his reputation. It was about her. He had made her art, her voice, her journey, the centerpiece. And that, more than anything, showed her that he had truly changed. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, his voice gentle. "But I wanted to. Because I believe in you, Lily. Because I love you. And this time, I want to do it right." For the first time since that night at the gala, Lily felt the wall around her heart begin to crack. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man he was now, the man who had learned from his mistakes, who had fought to become better. And in that moment, she knew that maybe, just maybe, second chances were possible. The days leading up to the charity gala were filled with a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. Lily spent hours perfecting her artwork, making sure every piece was just right, as this exhibition was more than just a showcase of her talent, it was a declaration of who she had become. It was no longer about pleasing Julian or anyone else, it was about her reclaiming her place in the world, standing tall. In her own light. As the night of the gala arrived, Lily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple yet elegant dress she had chosen for the occasion. It wasn't as extravagant as the gown she used to wear when she was with Julian, but it felt right for her. She had never felt more herself. She smiled at her reflection, taking in the woman who had emerged from the shadows of her past, the woman who had learned to stand on her own. She wasn't the same person who had walked away from Julian months ago. She was stronger, more confident, and most importantly, she was free. When she arrived at the gala, the sight of the grand venue took her breath away. The lights, the decorations, the people, all of it was breathtaking, but it was the center of the room that caught her attention. A large display of her artwork, elegantly framed and beautifully lit, stood there for all to see. It was her work, her vision, finally out in the world. For a moment, she stood there, taking it all in, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was her dream coming true. She was finally being seen. As she walked toward her display, she noticed the crowd gathered around, admiring her paintings, discussing them in hushed tones. It was surreal. For so long, she had worked in secret, pouring her heart into her art, never knowing if anyone would ever appreciate it. But tonight, her work was the focus, and it was being recognized by those who understood it. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience before. As the evening progressed, Lily mingled with the guests, grateful for the genuine compliments and conversations she had with people who appreciated her work. But through it all, her eyes kept searching for one person. Julian. She hadn't seen him yet, and part of her wondered if he would even show up. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure where they stood or what he expected from her. But as the night wore on, she finally spotted him across the room. He was standing by the bar, his gaze fixed on her from a distance. He was dressed in a sharp suit, looking every bit the part of the successful businessman he was, but something about him seemed different tonight. There was no arrogance in his posture, no mask of control. He was watching her, waiting for her to notice him. And she did. She couldn't ignore the pull in her chest as their eyes met. The distance between them seemed to vanish in that instant, and for a brief moment, she wondered if the world outside of this gallery had stopped. But she didn't walk toward him. Instead, she stood still, her gaze steady. This wasn't about him. It was about her. The moment was hers, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Julian, seeming to understand, slowly made his way toward her, his steps hesitant but sure. When he reached her, he paused for a moment, taking in the sight of her standing there, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "Lily," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "This is incredible. You're incredible." She smiled, but it was a different kind of smile, one of acceptance, not longing. "Thank you," she said softly. "I've worked hard for this." "For me?" Julian nodded, his eyes softening. "I know," he said. "I've seen it. I've seen you." There was a long silence between them, and Lily realized that for the first time, there were no unspoken words between them, no half-truths hanging in the air. Julian wasn't asking for forgiveness, he wasn't trying to win her back. He was acknowledging her, truly acknowledging her, in a way he never had before. She took a deep breath, feeling a wave of calm wash over her. "I'm proud of you," Julian said, his voice sincere. "And I'm proud of me, too," Lily replied, her voice steady and strong. "But we're not the same anymore, Julian. And that's okay. We've both changed." He smiled, a soft, almost bittersweet smile. "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm glad you found yourself. I just wish I could have been there with you, from the start." Lily looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of the past, but also lighter with the hope of the future. "We weren't ready then," she said gently. "Maybe we are now, but not together. Not like this. Not anymore." Julian's smile faltered, but he nodded in understanding. "I get it," he said, his voice tinged with sadness but also acceptance. As he turned to leave, Lily watched him go, a sense of finality settling in her chest. She had made peace with what they had been, with what they could never be. And that was enough. The rest of the night went by in a blur, but for Lily, it was the beginning of something new. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to walk it alone. She had found herself, and that was all she needed. As the gala came to a close and the guests began to leave, Lily stood by her artwork one last time, taking it all in. She had learned the hard way that love wasn't always enough, but self-love, real love for herself, was. And with that, she walked out into the night, ready for whatever came next.